Welcome back to the series that we've been talking about interest rates. In this part 2, we're going to talk about what I can do to lower my interest rate.
Okay, the second most common question that I'm receiving, and I'm sure Rich has heard this as well,
Okay.
When will interest rates get back down to 4%?
Well, that's a good question. A lot of that is driven by the economy, driven by what we're seeing happen with inflation. So what we look at a lot when we're trying to determine what's going to happen with the rates, or what are the Feds doing with rates? Mm-hmm. And their mandate is two parts. They want to see that inflation comes down and the employment softens. And inflation has shown signs of coming down, and we're beginning to see those signs of employment softening. But all that is going to then impact the overall market. So will we get back down to 4%? I think those were numbers that we saw during the pandemic.
Yeah,
those were rates that we saw. That was definitely an anomaly.
Yeah, it was a unique time, and to get down to 4%, there was a massive sacrifice.
Yes.
We don't want to see that, and it probably would take something like that type of event again. And there's just probably too much negative involved with something to drive interest rates that low. I think overall, we actually don't want to see rates get that low again, because it would signal that there's some other significant problems in the country and the world. It's probably best if people start moving away from that mindset and remember that average interest rates are somewhere north of 5%, over a long tail period of time with average interest rates.
Yeah. And historically, if you look at the long-term charts, anything under 6% is considered a really good interest rate.
Well, that I think probably answers that. Don't expect 4% interest rates to happen again. If we see it, we've got bigger problems maybe. That probably gives us a pretty solid answer for number 2. So we'll move on to our third question. And I definitely was hearing this when we were towards the peak of around 8% interest rates. But if we continue to see a trend of interest rates going down, question around, can I buy down my rate? Can I get a lower interest rate than what I'm seeing the average is? So Is that possible?
Yeah.
And how does that work?
Yeah. That's a great question. I have 2 parts to answer it, and
Let's do it.
try to go quick on those. But first thing, when you buy down an interest rate, you're basically prepaying your interest. So you're saying, okay, I'm going to prepay some of that interest to the investor so that I can get a lower rate for as long as I want. But that's the second part, is how long do you think you're going to keep that interest rate? And so you strategize. You say, okay, what's the return on the investment for buying this down? And we calculate out that break-even point. And if let's say it's 24 months. Well, great. Do you think you're going to keep this house, or are you going to keep that loan for more than 24 months? Then absolutely buy it down. If not, there's no need.
Probably not worth it.
Mm-hmm.
So you're paying no matter what.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah.
It's just, do you want to pay up front?
Do you want to pay it up front? And then they're working with you to strategize, am I getting some seller contributions? So am I actually offsetting that cost? Is that to my advantage, so I don't have to pay for that?
Yeah.
So we can, there's different ways to package it.
True.
And if it makes sense. Or let's say you have a buyer who needs to qualify for just a little bit more, and we're asking for the seller to contribute a little bit. So now we can buy down that interest rate so the buyer can qualify.
Yeah.
And then it all comes together.
Yeah. So basically, it's possible to have the seller contribute through a seller credit to the buyer at close. That's usually a small percentage of the purchase price. There are some limitations to that, and it gets into some other topics and some requirements per who the lender is and how they qualify. So we won't get into that, but there are some ways that you could maybe offset some of those costs through a rate buy down. So it's possible to do. You can certainly look at how it works for you, but it's going to be a case by case to dive into the hard numbers on that.
Right. Yep. Let's analyze it, see if it makes sense for what you're trying to do.
Perfect.